In this video, I explain the strengths and weaknesses of arguments from authority. First, I have to explain what an argument from authority is. An argument from authority is also called an appeal to authority. In Latin, argumentum ad verecundiam, which meant argument from respect or modesty. The idea was that if you were making an appeal to authority, that you were a humble person and you were deferring to the opinions of someone whose opinions should carry more weight than yours. An argument from authority is an argument in one of the following two forms. It could be a logical argument in which you say that an authority figure says that some statement of fact is true, therefore that statement of fact is true. And again, this deals with statements of fact. In rhetoric, you can make an appeal to authority to say that an authority figure says that something is good or that something should be done, and therefore something is good or something should be done. Now, in rhetoric, you do deal with statements of fact, but you also make an appeal to feelings. So whenever you have a question about what is good or bad, or what is right or wrong, or what should be done or should not be done, then you must deal with feelings as well as facts. Again, here's an illustration of the two kinds of arguments from authority. In logic, you're dealing with what is true or what is likely to be true. So if somebody says that this authority figure says that this statement of fact is true, therefore you should believe that this statement of fact is true. That raises the question of whether you should believe what you are told. Should you trust that authority figure? Does that authority figure actually know what he or she is talking about? And is that authority figure likely to be telling you the truth? So those are the concerns when somebody is offering an argumentum ad verecundiam of a statement of fact. In contrast, in rhetoric, you deal with questions about what is right or wrong, what is good or bad, and what should be done or should not be done. And in the illustration there I show Moses receiving the 10 Commandments. So when you say that this should be done or this should not be done, and you were making an argument about, well, the 10 Commandments say that it is wrong to kill, you're making an appeal to authority of that God says that this should not be done. So that's an appeal to authority. So whenever you're having an argument from authority with respect to what is good or bad, or right or wrong, or so on, you should then think about who this authority is and why you should take their opinions seriously about what should be done or what should not be done. Arguments from authority pose a kind of problem called a dilemma. A dilemma is a choice between two bad options. The metaphor that was used in ancient times to illustrate this problem involved the horns of a bull. If you dodged in one direction to avoid one of the horns, you could increase your risk of getting stuck by the other horn. So, on one hand, we need to avoid giving too much weight to expert opinions. On the other hand, we have to avoid giving too little weight to expert opinions. Either one could create a problem. Experts are often right, but they're sometimes wrong. Albert Einstein was right about relativity. So if you accepted his expert opinion about relativity, you would have been on the right side of history. But Einstein was slow to accept quantum theory. If you accepted his early opinions about quantum theory, you would have been on the wrong side of history. Scientific authority poses a dilemma. If we put too little faith in the opinions of scientists, we will end up having to reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, if we put too much faith in the people who are respected as scientific authorities, we might be slow to accept new scientific discoveries. So either way, putting too little faith or putting too much faith in the people who are respected as scientific authorities could obstruct progress. We see the same thing when it comes to questions of politics and morals. Some leaders are good and some leaders are bad. Good leaders encourage good behavior, and bad leaders encourage bad behavior. An orchestra needs a strong leader. If you are a solo artist, in other words, if you're playing your instrument or singing entirely by yourself, then you are your own conductor. If you're playing in a small group, such as a string quartet or singing in like a barbershop quartet or something like that, you may not have an official conductor because you can rely on teamwork to coordinate with each other. But as the size of the group grows, the need for leadership increases, just because you need to coordinate the activities of a larger and larger group of people. So in order to get a symphony orchestra to perform, you need to have a conductor. But strong leaders can also do terrible things. This is a photograph of the entrance to the Auschwitz concentration camp. Democracy means that we, the people, lead. Ideally, it means that everybody can take part in making the decisions that affect everyone. We, the people, can listen to our scientists. This was a photograph of a hearing in which Congress was trying to figure out what was the cause of the disaster in which the rocket that was launching the Challenger space shuttle exploded and the lives of all the astronauts were lost. To the left is Richard Feynman, who is a physicist, and to the right is Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. Feynman was able to convince people that the problem in the Challenger explosion was the result of an O-ring, which was like a washer-type gasket between sections of the rocket, that was too brittle when it was cold, and the temperature was too cold, the atmospheric temperature was too cold when the shuttle was launched. And to prove his point, Feynman put the O-ring into the pitcher of ice water, took it out, and then snapped it. Arguments from authority are invalid, but can be strong. A logical argument consists of a set of statements, called the grounds or premises, that are offered in support of some other statement, which is called the conclusion. An argument is called valid if the conclusion has to be true, if all of the premises are true. An argument is invalid if the conclusion can be false, even if the premises are true. An invalid argument can nevertheless be strong. A strong argument has a high inductive probability. The probability that the conclusion is true if all of the premises are true is called the inductive probability of the argument. If that inductive probability is 100%, the argument is valid. If the inductive probability is less than 100%, even just a tiny bit less than 100%, the argument is invalid. If the inductive probability is less than 100%, the argument is an inductive argument. All inductive arguments are, by definition, invalid, because the inductive probability is not 100%. A strong argument has a high inductive probability, and a weak argument has a low inductive probability. If the argument is strong and all of the premises are true, then it's described as cogent. Now, this idea of high and low inductive probability is important, but it's hard to give a number value to high and low. It depends on how certain you have to be. So if the stakes are really high, you're going to demand a very high inductive probability before you would consider an argument to be strong. And if the stakes are lower, you may accept a lower inductive probability. So the question of how strong an argument has to be strong depends on the situation. Arguments from authority are invalid, but sometimes cogent. All arguments from authority are invalid because it is theoretically possible for an authority figure to be wrong. However, an argument from authority can be strong if the authority in question is knowledgeable and honest. An argument from authority is weak if the authority in question is a fool and or a liar. An argument from authority is cogent if it accurately represents the opinions of a true expert. By studying logic, you learn how to recognize an argument from authority. Logic teaches you that arguments from authority are invalid, which means that they can give you a false conclusion even if all of the premises are true. To decide whether an argument from authority is strong, you need the skills that you learn from studying rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion. Aristotle was a famous philosopher in ancient Greece, and his students compiled a famous textbook on rhetoric. Since then, just about any work about rhetoric has been described as merely footnotes to Aristotle. Aristotle taught that there are three means of persuasion: logos, pathos, and ethos, and it's important to understand how these things work. Logos means evidence, logic, and reason. Logos means the kinds of things that matter in a scientific debate: evidence, logic, and reason. Logos deals with questions of what is true or false and what is likely to happen. By using logos, you can figure out what options are available to you and what are the likely consequences of each outcome. However, you need more than logos in order to make good decisions. Pathos means feelings. Pathos cannot help you figure out what is true or false. Instead, pathos can help you figure out what you like or dislike and what you want or don't want. To make good decisions, you need to use logos first, then pathos. Logos helps you figure out what your options are. Pathos helps you pick the option that is best for you in your current circumstances. So when people say that emotion has no role in logic, what they really mean is that you shouldn't rely on your emotions to figure out whether a statement of fact is true or false. However, you are going to need your emotions in order to figure out what is right or wrong, what is good or bad, and what you should or should not do. To know right from wrong, you need logos and pathos. Logos will help you figure out how the universe runs and how society runs. Logos will help you figure out the likely consequences of each possible course of action. However, you need pathos to figure out how you feel about the means and the ends, and what you should do. So what ends do you want to achieve? Do those ends justify the means that you might consider using to achieve those ends? So when people talk about the question of whether the ends justify the means, that's a question that involves feelings, not just facts. Ethos means character. Ethos refers to the reputation of a writer or speaker. Is that person educated? Is that person honest? Is that person wise and good? We need to rely on ethos when we cannot figure out the solution to problems by ourselves. For example, we may not know all of the important facts, or we need help with math or logic, or we need moral guidance. To figure out whether an appeal to authority is weak or strong, you must evaluate the authority who is being cited. Does that person have ethos? To have ethos, you must be reliable in some way. You must know the important facts. You must know how to draw reasonable conclusions from those facts. You must tell the truth. And you must give people good guidance. To have ethos, you must be honest. But not all honest people have ethos in all situations. For example, to be an expert witness, you must be an expert. If you ever serve on a jury, you will have to judge the witnesses. You will have to judge their ethos. For example, you will have to judge whether an eyewitness is giving an honest account of what he or she really saw. A judge must decide whether an expert witness is really an expert in a relevant field, before that expert can give testimony in front of the jury. Then the jury must decide what to make of that expert's testimony. In the Bible, it says, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." A lot of people think that means that we shouldn't make judgments of other people. But I think it means that we should apply the golden rule when we judge other people. In other words, we should use the same criteria in judging other people that we would want to have applied to ourselves if we were in that person's situation. In reality, you have to make judgments of other people all the time. And if you're not good at making judgments of other people, if you're not good at making accurate judgments of other people, you can end up in really big trouble. Fortunately, there are some basic rules of thumb for judging other people. One is, does the person have the education, training, or experience in some relevant technical field? So, for example, if you need someone to fix your plumbing, you would hire a plumber, not an electrician. You would hire a plumber to do your plumbing and an electrician to do your electrical work. And you would preferably hire somebody who has a good reputation for doing good work. Another criterion is whether the person has a track record of telling the truth. If somebody cries wolf all the time, then you should put very little stock in what they say. If somebody is a habitual liar, then you shouldn't believe what they say. If someone consistently tells the truth, then they should earn your respect and you should give it to them. Another important criterion is how often a person's predictions come true. If somebody is really good at predicting what's going to happen, that means that they have a pretty good idea of how the society runs or how the universe runs, and you should take their advice very seriously. Another question is more about their moral integrity. Does that person walk the walk or just talk the talk? In other words, if the person says, well, we should do, or you should do this, or you should do that, does that person actually follow his or her own advice? Another question is, does that person set a good moral example? Would you buy a used car from that person? So if a person is ignorant and untrustworthy, the person lacks ethos and should not be trusted. On the other hand, if somebody has worked hard to earn your trust, you should give it to them. An appeal to authority is an invalid argument. The conclusion can be false even if the premises are true. Nevertheless, an appeal to authority can be strong if the authority being cited is trustworthy. If you dismiss the conclusion of a strong argument from authority because such arguments are not ironclad, you make another error in reasoning called the argument from fallacy. Don't dismiss expert opinions out of hand. Experts can be wrong, but experts are usually right. Otherwise, they wouldn't be regarded as experts. If someone is truly an expert, his or her opinion should be taken seriously. To refute an argument from authority, you have to have more expertise than the expert. In my book, Not Trivial, How Studying the Traditional Liberal Arts Can Set You Free, I explain that the word trivial came from the word trivium, which originally referred to grammar, logic, and rhetoric, which were the verbal arts that were included in the classical liberal arts curriculum. Originally, if you said that something was trivial, it meant that it was something that was of so much importance that you would not have to explain it to any educated person. Today, however, we often use the word trivial to mean things that are of minor importance. In my book, I explain why grammar, logic, and rhetoric are not trivial in the modern sense of the word trivial. The liberal arts were called the liberal arts because they were considered to be appropriate for freeborn men, as opposed to slaves. In Not Trivial, I explain how important grammar, logic, and rhetoric are to democracy. To free your mind, begin by studying grammar, logic, and rhetoric. You can find out more at my website, nottrivialbook.com.